It is a truth insufficiently acknowledged that nothing disrupts a peaceful English breakfast so thoroughly as a telegram arriving 2 minutes too soon. At precisely 8:46, which was, incidentally, 14 minutes before the usual hour at which any respectable village telegraph boy ought to be awake, let alone knocking furiously upon the ivy-choked door of Gallowmere Lodge. The boy in question, a mop-headed youth named Billy Lott, stood panting in the drawing-room vestibule, clutching a buff envelope as though it were a proclamation of war. "I was told to run, sir," he said, with the wary stiffness of a lad uncertain whether he had done something noble or unforgivably modern. The recipient of this ungodly dispatch was not, as it happened, the master of the house. That gentleman, Colonel Warburton, retired, splenetic, and ex-hussar, was still abed and arguing in a slurred whisper with his pillow. Rather, it was Miss Veronica Hargrave, his widowed niece, recently returned from a stint abroad and possessed of the pallid, capable air of a woman who has once hosted a séance without entirely believing in it. She took the telegram with a frown and a murmured, "Thank you, Billy," before breaking the seal with a silver letter opener shaped like a rapier. What she read made her go rather still. Not the sort of operatic stillness one sees in novels, but the genuine, uncomfortable pause of someone who has just found the wrong name in a will. "What is it?" asked her cousin Daphne, seated nearby and industriously peeling an apple with the intentness of a child solving quadratic equations. Miss Hargrave did not answer. Instead, she looked at the grandfather clock in the corner, a ponderous, gilt-colored thing, and narrowed her eyes as though it had personally betrayed her. Lord Peter Wimsey, who had come down from London 2 days prior to inspect the Warburton family's modest collection of early Jacobean miniatures, and, less officially, to escape the attentions of a certain Hungarian soprano with delusions of permanence, happened at that moment to be strolling along the east lawn, idly composing a limerick about the vicar's unusual nose. He was hailed, rather breathlessly, by Daphne through the parlor window. "There's something quite off with Veronica," she said as he entered, still twirling his monocle with habitual flair. "She's had a telegram, and now she's staring at clocks." "My dear Daphne," said Whimsy, "I've known several young ladies who stare at clocks after receiving communications of a sudden nature. It generally means either an elopement or an overdue tax. She says it's from the London Telegraph Office, time-stamped 7:38. But the thing is—" Here Daphne leaned in, as if about to confess a preference for Catholicism. "It arrived at 8:46. The boy swears he left the office only 5 minutes ago." Whimsy took the envelope from Veronica's now lax fingers and studied it. The paper was thin, the ink professionally impersonal. "Regret to inform stop body of Colonel Warburton found study. Stop police notified stop. Signed, rather unhelpfully, by someone at the Dower Lane Constabulary." Whimsy's gaze flicked to the hallway. "How long since anyone saw the Colonel?" "Oh," said Daphne vaguely. "He usually comes down at 9:30. Complains about the bacon." "Then perhaps," said Lord Peter with unsettling cheer, "we have time for breakfast and a murder, in that order, if cook is agreeable." Lord Peter Wimsey, having fortified himself with 2 rashers of bacon, a slice of black pudding, and the firm knowledge that no Englishman ought to investigate murder on an empty stomach, ascended the staircase with an elegant disinterest that belied his curiosity. Colonel Warburton's study was located at the far end of the west wing, a gloomy corner of Gallowmere Lodge, full of mahogany paneling and the sort of threadbare rugs that speak of a long decline born with stubborn dignity. Miss Hargrave trailed behind Whimsy in a subdued silence, clutching her cardigan at the throat as though it might hold back a cold that had nothing to do with draughts. "I haven't gone in," she said, as they approached the door. "The constable told us not to touch anything, but Peter, if the telegram was correct, then Uncle must already be." "Well, let us first determine whether he is late for breakfast or eternity," Whimsy replied mildly. He turned the brass knob and pushed. The room smelled of dust and bitter pipe smoke. Morning light filtered through the tall windows in pallid strips, illuminating the cluttered desk and the tall-backed armchair behind it. The colonel was slumped in that chair, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. One hand drooped over the side, fingers slightly curled, as though plucking at something invisible. His eyes were closed. A faint purplish bruising discolored the neck beneath his gray mustache. Veronica made a sound, a sort of hollow exhalation, but did not step forward. Whimsy advanced with a slow, almost lazy tread, his eyes flicking from the position of the chair to the fireplace, then to the carpet beneath the colonel's right shoe. "Well," he said gently, "that does rather support the telegram's thesis." He crouched beside the chair and examined the colonel's throat with practiced detachment. "No bleeding," he murmured. "No signs of struggle. Compression of the neck, possibly manual. Not the sort of man to fall asleep dramatically mid-memoir. Still warm, rigor not yet set in." He sniffed delicately at the dead man's lips, then inspected the coffee cup resting on a coaster with unusual care. "Odd." "What is it?" Veronica asked. "The coffee's cold, stone cold, which is peculiar, since our friend the telegraph boy received his message at 7:38, yes? And yet the colonel has not been dead. More than, let us be conservative and say 45 minutes. Unless this study runs on Antarctic time, he cannot have died before 8:15. Veronica frowned. "But the telegram was sent before that." "Exactly." Whimsy straightened up. "A pity. One always hopes the murder will be less punctual than the post." He glanced once more round the room, pausing at the fireplace where a neat pile of ash rested in the grate. A curl of blackened paper remained unconsumed, but too far gone to be legible. He studied the hearthrug, noted the faint indentation of something rectangular that had once rested there and was now absent, and made no comment. Instead, he walked to the bell pull beside the bookshelf and gave it a genteel tug. A minute later, the housekeeper arrived. Mrs. Brangley was a tall, weathered woman with a kind of unwavering stare that suggested she had seen much and judged all of it. She eyed the body without much reaction and curtsied stiffly. "I suppose you'll be wanting tea, my lord." "In time, Mrs. Brangley," said Whimsy. "But at present I should be most grateful for information. When did you last see Colonel Warburton?" She folded her hands. "Last night, my lord. He rang for a brandy around 10. I brought it myself. He was here. Same place. He said good night. Didn't look unwell. Bit sharp-tempered, but that weren't unusual. And this morning?" "Didn't see him, my lord. I put the coffee outside his study at 8, as I do every morning. It was still there when I came up just now." Whimsy pointed to the cup on the desk. "That one?" Mrs. Brangley hesitated. "No, my lord. That's his second cup. He always took one inside, drank it, then rang for another around 8:30. But he didn't ring today. Do you recall anything unusual yesterday evening? Visitors? Messages?" "There was a telephone call, sir, just before dinner. I took it in the hall. Some man, wouldn't give a name, asked for the colonel. Sounded like he was calling from a long distance. Bit of a buzz on the line. The colonel came out and spoke with him for 5 minutes, then went back in and said he wouldn't be joining the family at dinner. Did you happen to overhear anything of the conversation?" "I'm not in the habit of listening, my lord." "No, but even a well-trained ear sometimes picks up stray notes. Did he raise his voice? Mention names?" Mrs. Brangley hesitated. "Just one, sir. He said Henry at one point. Sounded surprised. Or angry. Couldn't tell which." Whimsy nodded as though that settled something obscure and turned to Miss Hargrave. "Does the name Henry mean anything to you?" Her brow furrowed. "Only cousin Henry, from the Sussex side. But he's been dead these 10 years. "Most inconsiderate of him," Whimsy murmured. "Still, we mustn't leap to conclusions. People have a distressing habit of sharing names." A tap sounded at the open door. It was Daphne again, looking faintly scandalized and far too interested. "There's a man outside asking for you, Peter. From the constabulary. Sergeant Follard." "Ah, excellent. The machinery of justice begins to turn. Let us meet our mechanical cog." Sergeant Follard, when introduced in the morning room, proved to be a square-shouldered fellow with small, suspicious eyes and a moustache that implied he had once auditioned for the role of chief inspector in a local amateur dramatics production. He had already taken a cursory glance at the body and was not, it seemed, pleased to find Whimsy nosing about his scene. "Lord Peter, is it? Heard of you. You're the one with all them detective novels written about you." "I deny everything," said Whimsy gravely. "But I confess I find myself entangled in this particular puzzle by sheer geographical accident. One must do something with one's mornings, Sergeant." Follard's expression suggested he would rather Whimsy found a less public hobby. "Telegram came in just after 8, he said. "Said body was found here. But your housekeeper swears no one called anything in. That's the odd bit. No one from the house touched a telephone." "I quite agree," said Whimsy. "The oddness is positively baroque. Perhaps you would permit me to retain the original telegram." Follard hesitated. "It's official property." "But hardly state secrets," Whimsy said gently. "It may be a forgery, or at the very least, a curious misdirection. I'll return it naturally." Follard handed it over, visibly grudging. "I'll have my man take statements. No one leaves the house." Whimsy inclined his head. "Naturally. Though I should mention, I believe your killer is still rather close to home." And with that, he turned on his heel and strolled toward the staircase, unfolding the telegram in one hand and humming, rather pointedly, an off-key bar from Der Freischütz. Behind him, Daphne muttered to Veronica, "Why that tune?" Veronica only stared after Whimsy's retreating figure, her voice low and uneasy. "It's an opera about a man who makes a deal with the devil and finds his bullet strikes the wrong target." Whimsy, ascending 2 steps at a time, smiled faintly to himself. It was, after all, always a matter of timing, and this murder, if it was to be called that, had begun with a telegram that arrived too early, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold too late. Whimsy had barely reached the upper corridor when he found the gardener, a stooped man named Giles, engaged in the equally stoic ritual of sweeping leaves from the gravel path. Giles glanced up, momentarily startled by the sudden intrusion of a well-dressed gentleman whose slippers made barely a sound on the stone floor. "Good morning, Giles," Whimsy said with a tilt of his head. "I trust the dawn has been productive." The gardener grunted. "The leaves don't stop falling, my lord, and neither does the wind. Nothing productive about it." "An admirable stoicism," Whimsy said, stepping closer. "Might I trouble you for a small matter? When did you last see the colonel?" Giles scratched his chin beneath a thatch of grey hair. "Yesterday afternoon, I reckon. He was out in the orchard inspecting the apple trees. Said he was worried about the blight coming down from the north. Did he mention any visitors or unusual occurrences?" "No, sir. Only asked if the new gate was secure. Said some vagrant might find it a convenient entrance." "And today?" "Didn't see him, sir. I was pruning the roses by the south wall from dawn. No sign of the colonel until you lot started making a fuss." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "And the gate? Any sign it was forced?" "Not a mark. Hinges oiled last week. Locks sound. Couldn't get in without a key." "Curious." Whimsy's eyes flicked toward the distant outline of the gate beyond the hedges. "And the telephone call last night? Did anyone in the household mention it to you?" Giles shook his head. "Never much for indoor chatter. Not my sort of thing." "Quite right, Giles. Indoor chatter can be rather tiresome, but it sometimes reveals who's wearing the gloves in a family." The gardener shrugged, a small smile breaking his weathered face. "I'm more used to gloves for digging. I leave the politics to the drawing rooms." As Whimsy turned away, the click of a door echoed softly behind him. He paused, looking back to see Veronica Hargrave standing hesitantly in the corridor. "Lord Peter, may I speak with you for a moment? It concerns the telegram." "By all means, Miss Hargrave. I find the mechanical confessions of trees less illuminating than human ones." She led him back down the stairs to the morning room, where the light fell more softly now, and the house seemed to exhale in the quiet afternoon calm. Taking a seat opposite Whimsy, she folded her hands neatly in her lap. "The telegram," she began, "was brought to me by the telegraph boy, Billy. But when I asked him about the timing, he insisted he had only just left the London office minutes before arriving here. His account seemed, well, implausible." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Indeed, a telegram appearing before it ought to be in the hands of the recipient is the very definition of implausibility. Did you question the boy further?" "Yes, but he was firm. Said the clerk handed him the message at 7:38 sharp. No mistake. Was he accompanied by anyone? Did he linger anywhere on the grounds?" "Not that I saw, but the butler, Mr. Finch, has been rather unhelpful since the body was found. He claims to know nothing and refuses to be drawn into any discussions." "Ah, Mr. Finch," said Wimsey, a small smile playing about his lips. "I've found that servants are sometimes less forthcoming than one might hope, but they do not escape scrutiny so easily." He rose and made his way toward the door. "I shall pay Mr. Finch a visit forthwith. Do not leave the house, Miss Hargrave. I would hate for you to be caught in an ill-timed storm of questions." Outside, the air was crisp and held the faint scent of cut grass and damp earth. Whimsy found the butler polishing silver in the vast kitchen, his face an inscrutable mask that betrayed nothing. "Mr. Finch, I trust I am not intruding?" The butler set down the cloth with a faint sigh. "Not at all, my lord. I've been expecting you." "A delightful coincidence," Whimsy said, circling the table. "Might I ask about the telegram delivery? Did you observe anything unusual?" Finch's eyes narrowed. "The telegram, sir. It was delivered early, as you well know, but I cannot say why. I was elsewhere in the house at the time." "Was anyone else nearby? Servants or visitors?" "There was Miss Daphne in the hall. She was expecting a call herself, if I am not mistaken." "Indeed. And what of the housekeeper? Mrs. Brangley mentioned a telephone call to the Colonel late yesterday." "Ah, yes. I overheard part of that conversation. The caller did not identify himself, but it was clear he knew the Colonel well enough to unsettle him." "Unsettle him how?" "By mentioning the name Henry." Colonel Warburton's expression darkened. He refused to discuss it afterward. Whimsy nodded, folding his hands. A man's past often has a way of catching up, does it not? "Tell me, Mr. Finch, have you noticed anything amiss in the household these past days? Arguments, misplaced items, or unusual behavior?" The butler's gaze flicked toward the grand staircase. "There was some tension between Miss Veronica and her cousin Daphne. They disagreed over the Colonel's will. Nothing out of the ordinary, but voices were raised." "And the Colonel himself? Did he confide in you about his state of mind?" "Only that he feared for his health and reputation. He had enemies, he said, but would not name them." Whimsy's eyes twinkled. "Enemies in a peaceful village are often neighbors in disguise." The butler inclined his head. "Indeed, my lord." As Whimsy departed, he turned briefly. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. Your candor is most appreciated." Back in the drawing room, Veronica awaited anxiously. "Mr. Finch has been most circumspect," Whimsy said, "though that is to be expected. Servants have their own loyalties and fears." She nodded. "I only wish Uncle had confided in me." "Secrets in families are like locked boxes," Whimsy remarked. "It is our job to find the key and, occasionally, the poison hidden within." At that moment, Sergeant Follard reappeared, clutching a bulky notebook. "I've taken statements from the staff, Lord Peter, and we found something odd." "Do enlighten me." "There's a window in the Colonel's study on the south side that was found ajar this morning. None of the servants noticed it last night. An open window in a locked room, Whimsy mused, is as inviting as a half-smoked cigar left in a deserted smoking room. It suggests a hurried exit or an uninvited entrance. Veronica looked horrified, but the garden gate is locked and Giles says it's secure. Locks and windows, Whimsy said, are only as good as the intent behind them. We must consider who had the means and the opportunity to manipulate these details. He paused, eyeing the clock. And then there is the question of the telegram's timing. If it was sent before the colonel died, someone has fabricated a message to mislead us. Daphne, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. But who would do such a thing? And why? Jealousy, revenge, desperation, Whimsy said softly. Human motives are often more grotesque than the crime itself. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the lace curtains. Whimsy, standing by the window, tapped the telegram thoughtfully. "This is no ordinary murder," he said at last. "It is a carefully orchestrated drama, a performance with actors and props designed to confuse and deceive. Our task is to unravel the script and find the true author." Veronica's hands trembled slightly. And what if the author is someone we know, someone we trust? Then, Whimsy said with a dry smile, we must remind ourselves that trust is a fragile thing, as delicate as a Jacobean miniature, and just as easily shattered. As the house settled into uneasy quiet, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared to delve deeper into the tangled web of secrets that Gallowmere Lodge held, knowing full well that each answer would only reveal more questions. Whimsy spent the evening in his customary armchair by the drawing-room fire, a volume of Horace unopened in his lap and the telegram resting beside his half-smoked cigar. The house, though quiet, thrummed with an undercurrent of unease, as if Gallowmere Lodge itself resented the disruption of its ordered routine. Outside, the wind whispered insistently among the ancient oaks, a spectral accompaniment to the puzzles within. Miss Hargrave, having accepted the sergeant's assurance that she was safe within the household, had retired early, leaving Daphne to pace restlessly near the window. Sergeant Follard sat opposite Whimsy, scribbling notes with the earnestness of a man eager to impress, but lacking the finesse of subtlety. "Tell me, Sergeant," Whimsy began, flicking ash into the tray, "have you had occasion to examine the Colonel's correspondence, letters, diaries, or any documents that might shed light on the nature of his recent affairs?" Follard frowned. "We found a locked drawer in his desk, my lord. Haven't forced it open yet, pending your direction." "Locked drawers are the dustbins of secrets," Whimsy mused. "Pray, obtain the key post-haste. I would wager it might contain the missing pieces of our conundrum." At that moment, the butler entered, carrying a small, ornately carved wooden box. "My lord, I believe this was the drawer's key. It was found inside the Colonel's inside jacket pocket." Whimsy took the key and examined it thoughtfully. A prudent place for one's most guarded secrets. He rose and led the party back to the study, where the melancholy figure of Colonel Warburton still occupied the armchair, his eternal repose bathed in the flickering lamplight. The drawer yielded a slim, leather-bound journal, its edges worn and the lock surprisingly fragile. Whimsy flipped it open with reverence, his eyes scanning the neat, almost obsessive handwriting. "Here," he murmured, "we have the Colonel's own thoughts. Perhaps a window into his soul, or the shadows lurking just beyond." The journal's recent entries were terse, betraying a mind troubled by something more than mere health or estate matters. One passage stood out. July 21st. "The past returns with a vengeance. Henry's name spoken again. I fear my secrets are no longer mine to keep. Must remain vigilant. Trust no one, not even Veronica." Veronica's face paled. "Henry? The cousin? But he died 10 years ago." "Indeed," Whimsy said quietly. "Or did he? And if not, what purpose does this illusion serve? Perhaps a family legend, or a spectre haunting the Colonel's imagination, Daphne suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Imagination is a splendid thing, Whimsy replied, but murder is decidedly real. And this journal hints that the Colonel's death may be less fortuitous than first presumed. He closed the book and faced the others. We must consider that the telegram's premature arrival was deliberate, a message sent to manipulate, to preempt, to deceive. Who would gain from such a ruse? Veronica asked, her voice trembling. Wimsey lit another cigar, the amber glow illuminating his thoughtful expression. Who indeed? Let us examine the household for motives, means, and opportunity. For murder, like a finely crafted puzzle, reveals itself only when every piece is in its rightful place. Over the next hour, Whimsy conducted interviews with each member of the household under the watchful eye of Sergeant Follard. The gardener, Giles, admitted to occasional resentment toward the Colonel's stern demeanor, but denied any hostility serious enough to provoke violence. Mrs. Brangley, the housekeeper, maintained a rigid discretion, her loyalty unshaken even as subtle cracks appeared in her facade. Daphne's anger at her cousin Veronica for challenging the will seemed a plausible motive, but Whimsy noted her agitation was more grief than guile. Mr. Finch, the butler, revealed no new clues, his silence as impenetrable as the locked drawer. But it was a seemingly trivial observation that caught Whimsy's eye. The clocks throughout the house, it appeared, were not synchronized. The grandfather clock in the hall ran fast by 5 minutes. The study's mantel clock lagged behind by 7. Even the kitchen's wall clock was a minute out of harmony. A subtle discord, Whimsy remarked to Follard, which may be nothing or a deliberate measure to create confusion in timelines and alibis. He pressed further, asking the servants about the household routines. He learned that the Colonel was the only occupant who wore a watch. The others relied on the hall clock for timekeeping, yet the housekeeper admitted that she sometimes adjusted the clocks herself to prevent them from chiming in the night, a fact that complicated the time puzzle. An excellent layer of obfuscation, Whimsy mused. Timing, my dear Sergeant, is the very lifeblood of a murder investigation. If the clocks are untrustworthy, so too may be the testimonies tied to them. Later, alone with Veronica, Whimsy took the liberty of examining her personal effects in the drawing room. Among her letters, he found one sealed but unposted, addressed to a solicitor in London. The note inside was brief and enigmatic. The past will not stay buried. I beg your counsel and discretion. Miss Hargrave, Whimsy said softly, may I ask what this concerns? She hesitated, then sighed. It relates to the Colonel's estate. There are complications, disputes that have festered for years, hidden wills, forgotten debts, and family grievances. I hoped to resolve them quietly. A most prudent course, Whimsy said, but quiet is a fragile commodity in a household such as this. As the evening deepened, Whimsy retired briefly to the study to piece together the fragments of the day's revelations. His gaze fell again upon the telegram. If the message was sent prematurely, then who had access to the telegraph office's schedule? Who could have timed the dispatch so precisely as to create an illusion of a murder announced before its occurrence? He recalled the telephone call the night before, the unnamed man who had unnerved the Colonel by mentioning Henry. That name, repeated now thrice in different contexts, suggested a spectre far more tangible than mere legend. Suddenly, the faint echo of footsteps in the corridor brought Whimsy to his feet. It was Miss Hargrave, who entered with a troubled expression. "Peter," she whispered, "I overheard something this afternoon. Mr. Finch was speaking to Giles in the garden near the tool shed. Giles mentioned a package delivered yesterday evening, something the Colonel insisted be kept hidden." "A package?" Whimsy's mind raced. "Do we know its contents?" "Number." But Giles seemed uneasy about it. He said the Colonel told him to bury it near the old oak. "Buried secrets beneath an ancient tree," Whimsy murmured. "How very Gothic." He smiled thinly, but there was steel beneath the mirth. "We must investigate this at once. It is entirely possible that the key to the mystery lies in what has been buried." Together, they stepped outside, the moonlight casting long shadows over the grounds. The ancient oak stood sentinel at the edge of the orchard, its gnarled limbs like skeletal fingers against the night sky. Whimsy knelt and began to dig with his gloved hands, soon uncovering a small rusted metal box sealed with a faded wax seal bearing the initials H.W. With trembling fingers, Veronica broke the seal, revealing a stack of yellowed papers and a photograph, an image of a younger Colonel Warburton standing beside a man unfamiliar to her. Whimsy examined the photograph closely. The man's sharp eyes and stern jawline were unmistakable. "Henry," he said quietly, "it appears our ghost is quite corporeal after all." The papers contained letters, threatening missives demanding repayment of a long-forgotten debt, and warnings that the Colonel's past misdeeds would come to light if he did not comply. As they returned indoors, Whimsy's mind was alight with possibilities. The past was not merely a memory. It was a lever, a weapon, and perhaps the motive behind a carefully staged death. The stage was set for the next act, and Whimsy, ever the meticulous conductor, was ready to coax the truth into the open. The atmosphere in Gallowmere Lodge had thickened palpably with the unearthing of the metal box beneath the ancient oak. The stale scent of secrets long buried now permeated the rooms, as if the very walls resented the disturbance of their silence. Whimsy, seated once more in the study, carefully laid out the documents before him, while the others watched with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Veronica, her composure visibly shaken, glanced at the faded photograph of the younger colonel and the stern-faced man beside him. "Who do you think this is?" she asked quietly. Whimsy studied the figure with a practiced eye. "A man who has a profound claim on the colonel's past. Judging by the tone of these letters and their nature, threats, demands, warnings, he is no mere acquaintance." He tapped one of the yellowed letters with his finger. "One wonders if he is Henry himself, or someone acting on his behalf." Daphne, standing by the window, peered out into the night, her voice tinged with unease. "But if Henry is alive, why wait so long to come forward? Why not confront the colonel openly?" "Ah, but Miss Hargrave," Whimsy smiled faintly, "where would be the fun or the profit in that? Blackmail is a delicate art, predicated on secrecy and fear. It is not unusual for a debtor or enemy to cloak himself in shadows, striking when the victim's defenses are lowered." He continued, "More importantly, this changes our perspective on the telegram. If someone sought to manipulate time and perception, it may have been to provide an alibi or to divert attention. We must now ask, who would benefit most from the colonel's early death, and why?" Sergeant Follard, who had been silently absorbing the revelations, cleared his throat. "If I may, my lord, perhaps the person sending these letters has accomplices nearby. Someone in the household or the village might be colluding to bring this to pass." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "Precisely. The machinery of a crime is rarely solitary. It requires cogs and wheels, each playing its part with subtle precision." He stood and moved toward the mantel, adjusting the clocks once more. There is still the matter of the discordant timepieces, a subtle but deliberate confusion in temporal markers, enough to make alibis slippery. Follard interjected, "But, my lord, the servants insisted that the clocks were synchronized yesterday morning." "Ah, but do we know that for certain? And what if a clock was adjusted only after the telegram arrived, to muddle the times reported?" Whimsy tapped his chin. "Let us consider the movements within the house on the night of the murder. The telegram arrived at precisely 9:47 p.m., according to the telegraph office's record. The colonel was last seen alive at approximately 9:15 p.m. by Mrs. Brangley, who served him his nightly tea." He looked toward Mrs. Brangley, who sat stiffly in the corner, clutching her handkerchief. "You say you saw the colonel at 9:15? Yes, my lord. He was in his study, reading by the lamplight. I left the room shortly after with his tea tray. Did anyone else enter the study after that time? No, sir. I do not believe so. And yet the telegram suggests the colonel was dead or dying before it even arrived. A curious contradiction. Whimsy's eyes gleamed. Exactly so. This discrepancy indicates that the telegram was designed to confuse. But to what end? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Veronica bit her lip. Do you suspect the telegram was sent by someone inside the house? Not necessarily, but it is a possibility we cannot ignore. Wimsey lit another cigar and exhaled thoughtfully. We must investigate the telegraph office. If the telegram was sent prematurely, then someone had access to the message before its official dispatch. Poirot nodded. I can arrange to visit the office tomorrow, my lord. Excellent. Meanwhile, I intend to examine the colonel's study for any overlooked evidence. Wimsey's gaze swept the room, lingering on the heavy curtains and the thick carpet, before settling on the ornate soundproof door leading to the adjoining library. Soundproof, you say? Wimsey mused aloud. Indeed, my lord. It was installed recently at the colonel's request, said Mr. Finch, the butler, his tone neutral but eyes unreadable. A curious addition, Wimsey said. Soundproof doors are not common in country houses, unless one wishes to keep certain conversations or noises from being overheard. He approached the door, pressing his ear against the wood. No sound penetrated. A perfect place for clandestine meetings, or perhaps concealment. Could the murder have been committed in that room? Daphne asked. It is conceivable, Wimsey replied. But we need more than conjecture. I shall return here shortly with the sergeant and conduct a thorough search. The night wore on with little more said, save for occasional observations about the intricacies of timekeeping and the psychology of fear. Whimsy retired to his quarters, yet sleep eluded him as his mind raced through possibilities and half-formed hypotheses. The next morning dawned bleak and overcast, the sky heavy with impending rain. Poirot returned from the telegraph office with news that added a new layer of complexity. The clerk on duty last night recalls a stranger arriving shortly before the telegram was sent, Poirot reported. He was seen speaking in a low voice with the operator and handed over a note marked urgent. Did the clerk recognize the man? Wimsey asked. No, my lord. He was described as wearing a dark overcoat and hat, with his collar turned up. He left immediately after the telegram was dispatched. A shadowy figure indeed, Wimsey said, tapping his cigar on the windowsill. This confirms someone orchestrated the message's timing to create an illusion. Poirot looked puzzled. But why? To what purpose? To mask the true time of death, Wimsey answered, or to implicate another, perhaps the one we previously suspected, the jealous nephew or the embittered heir. He directed the sergeant to retrace the movements of all household members that night, scrutinizing every alibi and statement. As the investigation deepened, Wimsey made a particular request to speak once more with Giles, the gardener. He found the man near the tool shed, hands stained with earth from the previous night's digging. Giles' usual bluster was subdued, replaced by an uneasy frankness. "My lord," he began reluctantly, "I didn't mean to keep anything from you, but the colonel asked me to bury that box quick and quiet, said it contained evidence that might ruin the family." "Evidence of what nature, Giles?" The gardener hesitated. "Old debts, threats, but also something about a change in the will. The colonel said he'd been forced to rewrite it after some scandal years ago. Said he never trusted Veronica or Daphne with the truth." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. A new motive emerges. The inheritance, the secret will, and the tangled relationships between those who stand to gain or lose. He considered the tangled web before him. The premature telegram, the mysterious Henry, the discordant clocks, the buried box, and the shifting wills. Each thread pulled at another, unraveling the carefully maintained facade of Gallowmere Lodge. "We must find that revised will," Whimsy said quietly. for in its clauses and codicils lies the key to understanding who wished the colonel silenced and why. As the storm clouds gathered, Whimsy prepared to confront the household once more, intent on pressing each member with the newfound evidence. The game was far from over, and the house with all its secrets still held its breath in anticipation. The following day dawned a sullen grey, the sky hanging low with the heavy clouds that promised rain, as though the heavens themselves were inclined to brood over the dark affairs of Gallowmere Lodge. Lord Peter Wimsey, having taken his breakfast in contemplative silence, summoned the household once again into the library, a room that had witnessed many a veiled conversation, but now bristled with an expectant tension. The servants and family alike gathered in the room, their faces a mixture of unease and curiosity, as Whimsy, poised with an air of gentlemanly authority, began his examination of their statements and demeanors anew. The evidence of the buried box and the telegraphic subterfuge had sharpened his interest. The tangled web was far from unraveled, but each thread was beginning to reveal its pattern. He addressed Veronica first, his gaze steady yet imbued with subtle irony. "Miss Hargrave, you mentioned that the colonel had never trusted you or Daphne with the truth. A curious admission. One might assume that a daughter would be privy to such confidences, especially those that concern the future of the family estate." Veronica's lips pressed thin. "The colonel was a proud man, my lord. He preferred to keep his secrets close, perhaps out of fear or old grievances, I cannot say." Fear, Whimsy mused. A powerful motivator, often underestimated in its influence upon human behavior. "Tell me then, Miss Hargrave, did you or your sister stand to benefit directly from the altered will Mr. Giles alluded to?" Veronica's eyes flickered with a guarded light. "We have been assured of our inheritance by our solicitor, Sir Bernard Heverland. But beyond that, I know no details." Whimsy inclined his head. "Sir Bernard, you say? May I have the pleasure of meeting him? His testimony may prove illuminating." Turning to the butler, Mr. Finch, Whimsy inquired after the solicitor's whereabouts. "Sir Bernard is currently in London, my lord, but he is expected to return within the week." "That will be a considerable delay," Whimsy said. "Nonetheless, we shall proceed with what we have at hand." His gaze then fell upon Giles, the gardener, who stood at the edge of the group, dirt-stained and evidently uncomfortable. "Giles, you mentioned a scandal of some years past. Would you be so kind as to elaborate?" Giles shuffled his feet, glancing down at the polished floorboards. "I only overheard scraps, my lord, but the colonel once spoke of a financial ruin that had struck the family after the Great War. Something about a business partner who vanished, and debts that nearly lost the estate." "And this Henry," Whimsy continued. "The man in the photograph with the colonel, might he have been involved?" The gardener nodded reluctantly. "The name Henry came up often. Henry Craven, they called him. The colonel said he was once a friend, but later an adversary." "Adversary indeed," Whimsy said dryly. "Old alliances sour in the shadow of money and betrayal." The mood in the room tightened as he moved to the next matter. The telegraph office and the shadowy figure who had sent the premature telegram. The presence of this stranger at the telegraph office suggests premeditation and access. Someone with a keen knowledge of the colonel's movements and the inner workings of the household. Follard, standing alert beside Whimsy, interjected, "I've traced all visitors to the lodge that day. Apart from the family and servants, only one stranger came. Mr. Philip Lorraine, an old acquaintance of the colonel's." A murmur passed among the assembled. Philip Lorraine was known in local circles as a charming but volatile man with a penchant for gambling and debts. Whimsy's eyes sharpened. "Mr. Lorraine, then, does he bear any ill will toward the colonel?" Veronica spoke before anyone else. "Philip and father had their disagreements, but I would not believe him capable of murder." "Belief, Miss Hargrave, is a luxury we cannot afford," Whimsy said crisply. "We require facts." He motioned to Follard. "Sergeant, bring Mr. Lorraine here at once." Within the hour, The gates of Gallowmere Lodge opened once more to admit Philip Lorraine, who entered with a studied casualness, masking a flicker of unease. His sharp eyes took in the gathered company before settling on Whimsy. "Lord Peter," he said with a slight bow, "to what do I owe this pleasure?" Whimsy smiled thinly. "Mr. Lorraine, I trust you are aware of the tragedy that has befallen Colonel Hargrave." Lorraine's face darkened. "I am indeed. A terrible blow to the family and to the village. Your movements on the night in question are of particular interest to us," Whimsy continued, folding his hands. "Would you care to enlighten us?" Lorraine's posture stiffened imperceptibly. "I was here at Gallowmere briefly, as was my custom to visit. I left before the telegram arrived. And can anyone verify this? Veronica saw me leave, as did Giles in the garden." Whimsy arched an eyebrow. "Curious that the gardener should witness your departure. Tell me, Mr. Giles," he turned, "when exactly did you see Mr. Lorraine?" "Just after 9 p.m., my lord. I was checking the greenhouse door and Mr. Lorraine passed me on the path to the village." "And the telegram was sent at 9:47? "Yes, sir." "An hour's difference then. Plenty of time to commit a deed and flee." Lorraine's face darkened again. "You insinuate I had a hand in the colonel's death?" "Merely exploring all possibilities," Whimsy replied smoothly. "Tell me, Mr. Lorraine, what business took you to the telegraph office that evening?" Lorraine hesitated. "I needed to send a message. Private business." "Would you mind sharing its contents?" "Quite so," Lorraine said with a forced smile. "But it was nothing of consequence." Whimsy was not so easily satisfied. "We shall verify your story at the telegraph office, then." Turning to Follard, he said quietly, "Have the clerk prepare a detailed record of all messages sent and received that night. There must be a paper trail." The interrogation of Lorraine had revealed little beyond suspicion, but something in his nervous manner struck Whimsy as inconsistent with innocence. Yet he withheld judgment, preferring to accumulate evidence before drawing conclusions. Later that afternoon, Whimsy and Follard conducted a meticulous search of the colonel's study and the adjoining library. The soundproof door, a peculiar feature, was carefully examined. Whimsy found a faint smudge on the lock, a clue that suggested recent tampering. Someone sought to ensure that noises, or perhaps voices, would not escape this room, Whimsy murmured. An attempt to conceal more than mere sound. In a secret compartment within the library's bookcase, hidden behind a row of dusty tomes, Whimsy uncovered a small ledger. Its pages detailed accounts that did not appear in the official books of the estate. Payments made, sums received, many bearing the name Henry Craven. The ledger was marked with dates spanning several years, and a pattern emerged, large sums flowing irregularly, as if for hush money or debts settled in shadows. "This," Whimsy said, "confirms a long-standing financial relationship between the colonel and this elusive Henry. But why the secrecy?" As evening fell, Whimsy summoned Veronica and Daphne to the library. "Ladies, the time has come to be candid. The shadows lengthen, and the truth, like a candle flame, requires oxygen to burn clear." Veronica's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. "We shall do what we can, my lord." Whimsy laid the ledger before them. "Your father kept many secrets, it seems, not least of which concerns his financial entanglements and the revised will. Did either of you know of its existence?" Daphne shook her head. "We were kept in the dark." "Then who stood to gain, Miss Hargrave?" Veronica's composure cracked for the first time. I do not know. But Philip Lorraine's debts were a matter of gossip. Perhaps he was desperate enough to force the colonel's hand." Whimsy smiled thinly, a possibility worth pursuing. As the household retired for the night, the detective's thoughts churned. The tangled threads of time, deceit, and human frailty were converging on a single grim conclusion. The telegram, the buried box, the secret will. They all pointed to one simple truth. In the serene facade of Gallowmere Lodge, murder was a matter of calculation, not chance. Whimsy prepared to press forward, knowing the revelation was near, yet careful to keep his cards close. The night's stillness was deceptive. Beneath it, a storm was gathering, and the game of shadows was far from over. The next morning found Lord Peter Wimsey once more pacing the library with the deliberate, measured steps of a man whose mind was far busier than his exterior betrayed. The dim light filtering through the heavy drapes lent the room a muted solemnity, a fitting atmosphere for the delicate unraveling of human deceit. Whimsy's thoughts circled repeatedly around the ledger's mysterious entries and the premature telegram, neither of which yet yielded their full secrets. Follard entered quietly, carrying a sheaf of papers from the telegraph office clerk, whom they had interrogated at length. The clerk's meticulous notes detailed every message sent and received that fateful evening, from 7 p.m. through to the early hours of the following morning. Whimsy examined the timestamps with the intensity of a scholar parsing an ancient manuscript. The telegram sent at 9:47 p.m., Whimsy mused, was addressed to a Miss Beatrice Langley, ostensibly from the Colonel, warning her of a sudden change of plans. Yet the Colonel himself was seen alive by multiple witnesses well after that hour. The implication, then, is either deception or an unfortunate miscommunication. Follard nodded. Indeed, my lord. The clerk confirms that no one else was present at the telegraph office except Mr. Lorraine, who insisted on sending a private message. Curiously, the message's phrasing is formal, almost stilted, at odds with the Colonel's known writing style. Whimsy's eyes twinkled with irony. Suppose Colonel Hargrave was not known for his literary flourishes, then? A forgery of style, perhaps? Follard considered this. Most likely. It fits with our suspicions that the telegram was a deliberate falsehood, intended to mislead. As they debated, there was a gentle knock at the door. Lady Margaret Hargrave entered, her expression composed but bearing the subtle marks of grief and worry that only time could not wholly conceal. "Lord Peter, might I speak with you privately?" Whimsy gestured to a quieter corner of the room. "By all means, Lady Margaret." She approached, her voice lowered. "I've been thinking about the Colonel's recent behavior. You see, he was never a man to display fear or anxiety, yet in the weeks before his death, he became increasingly withdrawn, almost haunted. I fear there was something he could not share, some burden he bore alone." "An excellent observation," Whimsy said, steepling his fingers. "Fear and secrecy, as I mentioned earlier, can drive men to desperate acts, or make them vulnerable to manipulation. Did the Colonel confide in you at all?" "Only once," she said quietly. "He spoke of a certain debt of honor he owed to a man from his past, though he never named the man. It troubled him greatly." Whimsy's brow furrowed. "A debt of honor, you say, and the ledger's entries. Might they represent payments toward this mysterious debt?" "Possibly," Lady Margaret agreed. "But who could this man be?" Whimsy's thoughts immediately returned to Henry Craven, the name Giles had mentioned and which surfaced repeatedly in the ledger. "Craven," he muttered, "a man once a friend, now an adversary." Lady Margaret looked distressed. "I recall hearing whispers among the household staff about an incident during the war. The Colonel and Craven were comrades once, but something went terribly wrong, something that left a stain on their relationship." Whimsy's eyes gleamed with the promise of new insight. "We must uncover that incident. The past often holds the key to the present." Later that afternoon, Whimsy visited the village's modest post office, where the telegraph office was located. The clerk, a thin, nervous man named Mr. Jenkins, greeted him with visible relief at the prospect of an authoritative figure taking interest. "Mr. Jenkins, I must inquire further about the telegram sent to Miss Langley," Whimsy began, his tone polite but firm. Were you alone at the office that evening? Alone, my lord, Jenkins replied, except for Mr. Lorraine, who came in to send his message. I remember because it was later than usual, and I was eager to close. Did Mr. Lorraine stay long? Did you notice anything unusual? Jenkins shook his head. No, my lord. He was in and out within a few minutes, but the message he sent was odd. He seemed agitated. Agitated, you say? Did he ask you to send any other messages on the Colonel's behalf? No, sir. Just that one. But the telegram the Colonel supposedly sent to Miss Langley was not sent by me or anyone here. It arrived by courier earlier in the day before I opened. Wimsey's eyebrows lifted. By courier? That is intriguing. Do you recall who delivered it? Jenkins hesitated, then nodded. A man in a dark coat, very early in the morning. I thought it odd then, but I was too busy to ask questions. A courier delivering a telegram prematurely. This may be the crucial piece we needed. Whimsy's mind raced with possibilities. Someone with access to the telegraph office or its staff, a man with the foreknowledge and motive to sow confusion and provide an alibi. Returning to Gallowmere, Whimsy summoned Follard. Sergeant, arrange discreet inquiries among the telegraph office employees and any known couriers. Someone will have noticed the strange delivery. As dusk settled, Whimsy retired to the library once more, poring over the ledger and the notes from the telegraph office. The layers of deception seemed to peel back slowly, revealing not only the tangled financial relationships, but also a broader web of personal grievances and carefully maintained illusions. It was then that an overlooked detail caught his eye. A small notation in the ledger's margin. September 12th. Final payment. Confirm receipt before noon. The date was 2 days prior to the Colonel's death, and the stipulation of a noon deadline suggested a rendezvous or settlement of importance. Whimsy's lips curved into a faint smile. An appointment, no doubt, that went awry. His mind flitted back to Giles's testimony of the Colonel meeting an unidentified man in the garden shortly before the telegram was sent. Could this have been Craven or Lorraine? The pieces aligned uncomfortably. That evening, he requested Veronica and Daphne once again, their faces pale but resolute. Ladies, I must press you on your father's acquaintances, particularly any recent visitors or correspondences. Even the smallest detail may prove vital. Veronica hesitated, then said, There was a letter he received about a week ago, from an old war comrade. He seemed disturbed by it, though he destroyed it immediately. Destroyed it. Whimsy's interest piqued. Who witnessed this? My mother, Lady Margaret, and I. But the contents remain a mystery. Curious, Whimsy mused. Destruction of evidence is rarely without purpose. He glanced towards Daphne, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Miss Hargrave, have you noticed anything unusual? Perhaps unexplained noises or secret meetings? Daphne swallowed. There were times my father spoke on the telephone late at night, hushed and urgent, but I was told to leave him alone. Very well, Whimsy said softly. This nocturnal communication might explain the urgency we perceive in these accounts. He concluded, the final segment of this puzzle must be revealed soon, for time is the ally of no murderer. As the household retired, the storm that had threatened earlier finally broke, the rain pelting the windows with a rhythmic insistence, as if nature itself demanded that the truth come to light. Lord Peter Wimsey sat back in his chair, cigar in hand, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a man on the cusp of discovery. The shadows had begun to move. The theater of deception was poised for its final act. The morning dawned with a brittle chill, the clouds scudding low and grey across the skies of Gallowmere, as if nature itself conspired to mirror the heavy weight of the secrets yet to be unearthed within the walls of Hargrave Manor. Lord Peter Wimsey, invigorated rather than deterred by the gloomy weather, prepared to resume his silent vigil over the household. aware that the threads he was weaving must soon be pulled taut or risk slipping into irretrievable knots. Whimsy's first order of business was to summon Giles Lorraine to the library. The young man arrived with an expression of reluctant resignation, still smarting from the earlier insinuations that his alibi was anything less than flawless. Wimsey wasted no time in laying out the inconsistencies he had noted in Giles's account of the evening, particularly the vague description of the visitor in the garden. "I must ask you to reconsider your recollection, Mr. Lorraine," Wimsey said, arching a brow. "You mentioned seeing a figure, a man, talking with Colonel Hargrave shortly before the telegram was sent. Yet your description was, shall we say, somewhat indistinct. What manner of man was this?" Giles shifted uncomfortably. "It was dark, Lord Peter, and the garden was poorly lit. I only caught a glimpse, a tall figure wearing a coat, hat pulled low. It was enough to tell that the visitor was no friend to the household." Wimsey tapped his fingers thoughtfully. "A tall figure, you say? And what of his voice?" Giles looked puzzled. "I didn't hear him speak, I'm afraid. The men spoke quietly." "Quite so," Wimsey said dryly. "Whispered conversations and shadowy figures, classic tools of subterfuge. But I wonder whether the man was truly a stranger or someone known well enough to avoid detection." He paused, then fixed Giles with a steady gaze. "Might the visitor have been Mr. Craven?" The name elicited a flicker of recognition in Giles' eyes, but also something more, a hesitation, a flicker of unease. I can't say, my lord. Craven was not known to frequent the estate, and I never saw him there. Yet he had a grievance, as we know. The ledger's payments to him suggest an ongoing negotiation or extortion," Whimsy noted. "Do you recall any recent correspondence between your father and Mr. Craven?" "No, my lord," Giles answered quickly. "But there was a letter, delivered but immediately destroyed. My sister and mother saw it." "Ah, the plot thickens," Whimsy murmured, the corners of his mouth curling upwards. "And what of Mr. Lorraine's own conduct? You mentioned his agitation at the telegraph office. Is there reason to suspect he might be more involved than he admits?" Giles' face darkened. "Lorraine has always been difficult, proud and deeply loyal to the Colonel. But loyalty can be a double-edged sword." Whimsy allowed himself a faint smile. "Indeed, Mr. Lorraine. Now, I think it best that you remain close at hand for the moment. Your presence may prove invaluable." With Giles excused, Whimsy's thoughts turned back to the telegram itself. The premature delivery, the strange phrasing, and the courier who appeared unregistered, each element hinted at a carefully orchestrated deception. It was time to explore that avenue further. He sent Follard to make discreet inquiries in the village, particularly among those who might have connections to the telegraph office or to local couriers. Meanwhile, he took the opportunity to revisit the site of the telegram's supposed delivery at the manor. The study, with its heavy oak desk and rows of leather-bound volumes, had been the Colonel's sanctum, yet something there seemed out of place. Whimsy's eyes rested on the faded Persian carpet, noting with quiet interest that it bore a faint but irregular stain near the fireplace, an unremarkable blot that might have been overlooked by anyone but a man attuned to details. Moving closer, he saw that the stain was not coffee or ink, but something darker, more viscous. He knelt and inspected it with a magnifying glass, the pale morning light catching the sheen. "Blood," he said softly, yet oddly dried, as if preserved for days rather than fresh. His thoughts returned to Giles' testimony that the Colonel had been attacked in the garden. Could this blood be a trace left inside the house, a silent witness overlooked? If so, the attack had not been entirely external. Later that afternoon, as the household gathered for tea in the drawing room, Whimsy took the opportunity to observe the interactions between its members. Lady Margaret maintained her stoic composure, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry when Giles' name was mentioned. Veronica, on the other hand, appeared withdrawn, clutching a handkerchief tightly as if to ward off some invisible dread. Daphne was more guarded, but Whimsy caught a subtle glance exchanged between her and Giles, an unspoken tension simmering beneath the polite veneer. These small human dramas often provided the greatest clues. Whimsy himself took a measured sip of his Earl Grey before addressing the room. One wonders how much we truly know about the past deeds of those we think closest to us. It seems the Colonel's debt of honor was more than a mere financial obligation. There is history here, painful, tangled history. Lady Margaret's face tightened. I beg you, Lord Peter, to be discreet. There are family matters best kept private. Of course, Lady Margaret, but the past, as the bard reminds us, is prologue. It shapes the present in ways both subtle and profound. As the conversation drifted toward more general topics, Whimsy's attention was caught by a subtle sound, the faint, rhythmic ticking of a clock. It was not the grandfather clock dominating one corner, but a smaller, less conspicuous timepiece resting on the mantelpiece. The clock's hands indicated a time that did not align with the household's known schedule. Whimsy rose abruptly and crossed to the mantel, examining the clock closely. "Curious," he murmured. "This clock has evidently been stopped, or perhaps adjusted improperly. Yet it shows a time 15 minutes earlier than the others." "Why would anyone tamper with the clock?" Veronica asked, her voice hushed. "To manipulate perception, my dear. Time in these investigations is rarely innocent. The false telegram, the altered timepiece, both suggest someone sought to create an alibi or mislead the household about the exact timing of certain events." The room fell silent, the weight of that realization pressing down like the thick velvet curtains. Whimsy's gaze swept the faces before him, reading carefully the flickers of guilt, anxiety, and innocence alike. That evening, alone in his study, Whimsy reflected on the day's revelations. The manipulation of time, the hidden debts, the shadowy figures all hinted at a plan meticulously devised, yet fatally flawed in its execution. He resolved to confront the household once more, armed with the threads he had collected, ready to pull them toward their inevitable conclusion. Outside, the storm clouds gathered again, the wind whispering through the ancient oaks like a portent. The stage was set, the players uncertain of their roles. Lord Peter Wimsey, however, knew well that the final act was imminent, and the curtain would soon fall on this tragic and intricate drama. The following morning, the atmosphere at Hargrave Manor retained its usual brittle politeness, yet beneath the surface, currents of unease stirred with increasing vigor. Whimsy had requested the household's assembly in the library at mid-morning, ostensibly to clarify some lingering points about the telegram and Colonel Hargrave's movements. The request was accepted with the obligatory mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled apprehension that so often attends the arrival of a famous detective bearing quiet portent. As the assembled group settled, Lady Margaret with her faintly imperious poise, Giles Lorraine perched nervously near the window, Veronica clasping her hands as if in silent prayer, Daphne careful to conceal her tension behind a mask of polite detachment, and the ever-watchful servants lingering discreetly in the background. Whimsy chose his moment to begin, eyes bright with that blend of sardonic wit and acute intellect for which he was renowned. "Madame," he began, inclining his head to Lady Margaret, "your family has suffered a grievous shock, and I trust you will forgive my insistence on prying so closely into matters most personal. Yet I find it necessary to speak plainly for the sake of justice and clarity." His gaze flickered briefly to each face in turn, gathering the fragile threads of attention. The telegram, delivered some 15 minutes before it ought to have been, has become the linchpin of our inquiries. It is evident, as you all suspect, that the message was forged, or at least manipulated to serve a purpose not immediately obvious. He paused, allowing the weight of this assertion to settle. "Now, Lady Margaret, might you recall if your husband, Colonel Hargrave, received any guests or visitors late on that evening who might have had cause to wish him ill?" Lady Margaret's lips pressed tightly together. Only those I've already mentioned, Lord Peter. There was the solicitor, Mr. Finchley, and the local magistrate, Sir Reginald Perkins. Neither, I assure you, bore any ill will. Ah, yes, the solicitor, Whimsy said thoughtfully. A man with access to your husband's affairs and, one might surmise, intimate knowledge of the ledger and its contents. Mr. Finchley, you say? At that moment, the door opened, discreetly, and the solicitor himself appeared, summoned, no doubt, by Lady Margaret in an attempt to clarify his position. He was a lean man, sharp-eyed and precise, with the air of someone accustomed to delicate negotiations. "Lord Peter Wimsey," Finchley said, inclining his head. "I trust my presence will be of assistance." "Indeed, Mr. Finchley. I must ask you about the ledger, your knowledge of it, its recent entries, and particularly any correspondence or transactions that might explain the Colonel's unease in his final hours." Finchley adjusted his pince-nez and replied, "The ledger is a matter of strict confidentiality, naturally, but I can confirm that there were entries relating to a substantial sum owed to one Mr. Craven. The circumstances are complicated. Colonel Hargrave had sought to conceal this debt for reasons known only to himself." Whimsy nodded, steepling his fingers. "Concealment often breeds suspicion. Tell me, Mr. Finchley, were you aware of any efforts to negotiate or to intimidate Mr. Craven into silence?" Finchley's face darkened slightly. "I was asked to intervene, yes, but my attempts were rebuffed. Mr. Craven is a man of some obstinacy." Whimsy's smile was faint, almost sardonic. A man of obstinacy can be dangerous when combined with desperation. Turning to the rest of the company, he continued, "It seems, then, that the telegram's premature arrival was not mere coincidence, but a deliberate act to mislead, to fabricate an alibi, or to divert suspicion." Veronica, her voice trembling, ventured, "But who among us would benefit most from such deception?" "Ah, that is the question," Whimsy replied smoothly, "and one I intend to answer." He moved then to recount the timeline he had pieced together, the evening's activities, the moments of arrival and departure, the courier's strange behavior, and the suspicious stopping of the mantel clock at precisely the wrong time. Each detail was deliberate, a cog in a well-oiled machine of deceit. "In particular," Whimsy said, fixing Giles Lorraine with a piercing look, "I find myself pondering the actions of those who would stand to gain not merely from Colonel Hargrave's demise, but from the concealment of his financial entanglements." The young man's composure cracked for an instant, a fleeting shadow crossing his features. I do not understand, Lord Peter." "No, I think you do," Whimsy said softly. "Or at least, you suspect that the truth is more tangled than a straightforward quarrel." He then addressed the servants gathered near the door. "I must ask you all, did anyone notice anything unusual about the household routine on that night? Any deviations from the usual patterns of light, sound, or movement?" A murmur rippled through the group before the housekeeper, Mrs. Pembroke, spoke in her clipped voice. "Only that the drawing-room curtains were drawn earlier than usual, and the kitchen fires were banked sooner. It struck me as odd." "Curtains drawn early," Whimsy mused. "An effort to darken the house prematurely, perhaps to conceal the passage of a visitor or to hide movement within." He then directed his attention back to Giles. "Your earlier mention of a figure in the garden remains critical. Did you have reason to believe it was not Mr. Craven, but someone else? Someone with intimate access, perhaps, who might have sought to exploit the confusion?" Giles swallowed hard. "There was a shadow I did not recognize, but it could have been anyone, my lord." "Or no one at all," Whimsy added. "A ruse, a distraction." At this juncture, a sudden knock came at the door, and the butler entered, bearing a small, unassuming parcel. Whimsy took it and examined the seal, a broken wax emblem that bore the faint impression of a crest, one he did not immediately recognize. "An anonymous delivery," Whimsy said, raising his eyebrows. "How fitting for a mystery that thrives on secrets." Breaking the seal with the precision of a man accustomed to delicate matters, He withdrew the contents, a folded sheet of thin, slightly yellowed paper. The writing was cramped but hurried, and the message cryptic. The truth lies beneath the rose. A silence followed, heavy and expectant. Lady Margaret paled, and even Veronica's composure seemed shaken. Whimsy folded the note carefully, his mind racing through its implications. Beneath the rose, a symbol perhaps. The rose is often a family emblem or a secret sign. He rose and moved to the grand piano standing by the window, its polished surface gleaming faintly. "Might I ask, Lady Margaret, if any such symbol adorns your estate?" She nodded, drawing herself up. The rose is indeed the Hargrave family crest, appearing in the stained glass of the main hall and in the garden's center. Wimsey smiled thinly. "Then we have our next destination." With a wave of his hand, he motioned for the group to follow him through the heavy oak doors and out into the gray daylight. The garden lay before them, a formal arrangement of clipped hedges and carefully tended flower beds, with the unmistakable rose emblem planted at its heart. Whimsy approached the central bed and crouched, inspecting the earth. Freshly disturbed soil, though the gardeners swear no work has been done recently. He retrieved a small trowel from his coat pocket and gently turned the soil, revealing beneath a small wooden box, partially buried and damp with earth. With care, he extracted it and opened the lid. Inside lay several letters, stained with time and water, bound together with a faded red ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakable. Colonel Hargrave's. Reading aloud a passage, Whimsy's voice dropped to a grave whisper. "To those who seek the truth, beware the cost. The past cannot be buried forever." He looked up sharply. It appears, then, that the colonel anticipated danger and sought to preserve evidence in secret. The assembled faces reflected a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The game, Whimsy realized, was nearing its end. The clues had coalesced into a picture of betrayal, deceit, and concealed motives. Yet the final revelation, the mechanism by which the murderer had orchestrated the telegram's deception and attempted to conceal their crime, remained tantalizingly out of reach. As they returned inside, Whimsy's mind turned to the final pieces of the puzzle: the telegraph office's records, the movements of the courier, and the mysterious manipulation of time itself. He resolved that tonight, under the cover of darkness and with a keen eye and steady hand, he would recreate the scene of the crime and uncover the last secret held by the telegram that had arrived too early. The hours before dusk slipped away with a peculiar quietude at Hargrave Manor, as if the house itself were holding its breath, awaiting the inevitable unraveling of its tangled secrets. Lord Peter Wimsey, having carefully arranged for the necessary permissions, took advantage of the fading light to revisit the telegraph office in the village, accompanied by Bunter and Inspector Parker, who had by now resigned himself to Wimsey's labyrinthine methods with a grudging respect. The telegraph office was a modest affair, the walls lined with racks of telegram forms and a sparse collection of communication apparatus, all maintained with an efficiency born of rural habit rather than sophistication. The clerk, a man of middle age with wary eyes and a tendency to clean his spectacles nervously, greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Lord Peter Wimsey," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The police have been in earlier, but I'm happy to help as best I can." Wimsey inclined his head. "Thank you, Mr. Faraday. I require a precise reconstruction of the events on the evening in question, particularly the handling of the telegram sent to Colonel Hargrave." Mr. Faraday nodded and led them to a ledger, the pages yellowed but meticulously kept. "We log the times of receipt and dispatch, as well as the names of couriers and receiving parties." Whimsy scanned the entries carefully, noting the telegram in question. "Sent from London at 7:15 p.m., logged as received at the village office at 9:47 p.m. The curious anomaly, of course, was the recorded time of delivery to Hargrave Manor, 9:32 p.m., 15 minutes before the village office itself purported to have received it. An impossible timeline, Whimsy muttered, tapping the page. Unless one assumes someone falsified these entries. Mr. Faraday's face grew pale. I swear, Lord Peter, I record all times as they occur. The telegraph clock is regularly synchronized with the post office standards. Indeed, Whimsy said dryly. Then the only explanation is that the delivery time was adjusted post hoc to provide a convenient alibi. He glanced up at Inspector Parker, whose expression was taut. Is the courier still employed here? Joseph Mullins, the clerk replied. Young man, reliable enough, though a bit slow with his routes. Whimsy motioned for Mullins to be summoned. The courier arrived shortly, looking sheepish and ill at ease under the sharp scrutiny. Mr. Mullins, Whimsy began, I understand you delivered a telegram to Colonel Hargrave's residence on the evening of the 12th. Yes, sir, the young man replied, wringing his cap in his hands. Would you be kind enough to recount your movements that evening, from the moment you left the telegraph office to your return? Mullins nodded, clearing his throat. I left the office shortly after 9, taking the usual path along the village road. It was dark, but the moon was bright. I arrived at Hargrave Manor about 20 minutes later, gave the telegram to the butler, and then returned directly to the office. And did anything unusual occur on your journey? Any delays or detours? Mullins hesitated. No, sir, nothing unusual. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. May I inquire about your watch, Mr. Mullins? My father gave it to me, Mullins replied. I set it myself each morning. Did you set it according to the telegraph office clock? Usually, sir, though sometimes I rely on the church bells. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Ah, the church bells. A charming but unreliable timekeeper, especially when one's life might depend on precision. He turned to Inspector Parker. I wonder if the village clock might be a source of confusion. Why, yes, Lord Peter, Parker said. The clock tower has been out of sync for some days. We were hoping the repairs would be finished by now. That may explain some of our difficulties, Whimsy mused. If the courier timed his journey by the village clock rather than the telegraph standard, his recorded delivery time could be off, creating the illusion of an early telegram. Whimsy tapped his chin thoughtfully. Yet the village office ledger remains firmly recorded. The discrepancy must be deliberate, but by whom? Returning to the manor, Whimsy decided the matter required immediate field work. Under the cover of night, with only the faint light of a candle and his keen intellect, he planned to reenact the courier's journey, to measure the actual time required from the village telegraph office to Hargrave Manor along the exact route taken. As the moon climbed higher, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds, Whimsy set out with Bunter and a small lantern. The village was quiet except for the occasional bark of a distant dog or the muffled clatter of a late tavern patron returning home. Step by step, Whimsy measured the distance, noting landmarks, bends in the road and potential places where time might be lost or gained. At several points, the sound of the church bells drifted faintly, incongruous with the actual time. Here, he thought, lay the key. Returning to the manor, Whimsy called for the butler, Mr. Ellis, and questioned him on the delivery protocol for telegrams. Ellis explained that the courier hands the telegram to him directly, which he then places in the colonel's study. Whimsy requested to inspect the study, noting the heavy oak desk, the high-backed chair, and the array of papers meticulously arranged. His eyes lingered on a small clock sitting on the mantelpiece, its hands frozen at precisely 9:30 p.m., the time the telegram supposedly arrived. Mr. Ellis, Whimsy inquired, do you recall who last adjusted this clock? I'm afraid I do not, my lord. It's rather old and temperamental. Tempering clocks to create alibis is a practice as old as forgery itself, Whimsy said dryly. A thought struck him. Is there a key to the study? Indeed, my lord, kept on the ring with my other keys. May I see it? Ellis produced the keys, and Whimsy examined them, then requested permission to examine the study's door locks. He found them sound but noted a faint scratch on the edge of the door frame, suggesting forced entry or a hurried unlocking. "Curious," Wimsey murmured. "If the telegram was delivered at 9:32 but the clock stopped at 9:30, someone may have been manipulating time to mislead." Later that night, as the household retired, Whimsy sat in the dim study, surrounded by the collected letters and telegrams, piecing together the puzzle. The interplay between the clocks, the stopped mantel clock, the out-of-sync village clock, and the courier's own unreliable timepiece, formed the skeleton of a cunning deception. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Lady Margaret entered, her face pale but resolute. "Lord Peter, I must confess, I fear I have been less than forthcoming. There is one thing I did not mention." Whimsy gestured for her to continue. "The rose symbol," she said quietly. "My husband was obsessed with an old family secret, something about a hidden compartment in the garden's sundial, shaped like a rose. He believed it held documents that would ruin our family's reputation if discovered." Whimsy's eyes lit. A hidden compartment beneath the sundial. That might explain the urgency behind the telegram and the lengths to which someone would go to conceal certain truth. Together, they stepped outside to the garden once more, where the sundial stood like a sentinel. Whimsy ran his fingers along its base, feeling for any irregularities. After a moment, he found a small catch concealed beneath a carved petal. With a gentle click, the sundial's base shifted, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside lay a bundle of aged papers, letters, deeds, and photographs that painted a portrait of deception reaching back decades, involving forged wills and illegitimate claims to the Hargrave estate. Returning to the study, Whimsy examined documents with growing understanding. The telegram, the manipulated clocks, the hidden compartment, all pieces of a complex tableau designed to protect a family secret and to silence those who threatened to expose it. He looked up at Lady Margaret. "Your husband was trapped not only by his debts, but by the weight of his family's past. The telegram's premature arrival was a ruse to cover the timing of his demise and to mislead those who sought to uncover the truth." Before he could elaborate, a sudden noise from the corridor drew their attention. They hurried to find Giles Lorraine, pale and trembling, clutching a crumpled note. "It's from Veronica," he gasped. "She says she knows who did it, who forged the telegram and killed the colonel." Whimsy's eyes narrowed, a faint smile playing on his lips. At last, the final act approaches. Let us see what shadows remain to be brought into the light. The drawing room at Hargrave Manor was thick with tension as the household gathered. Lady Margaret's composed but anxious face, Giles Lorraine's pallid countenance, the vigilant Inspector Parker, and the quietly observant Bunter, who, as ever, maintained an air of discreet readiness. Lord Peter Wimsey stood by the hearth, a faint smile touching his lips, his demeanor as unruffled as the still flames before him. "My dear friends," he began, voice smooth and deliberate, "we have traversed a labyrinth of clocks, couriers, and clandestine compartments, yet the final thread to unspool remains the motive and the method. It is time to illuminate the shadows that have cloaked this sad affair." He paced slowly, gathering his thoughts with the precise care of a master chess player. To recapitulate, Colonel Hargrave's death was no random act of violence, but a calculated removal designed to protect a secret more precious than gold, the family's shameful legacy concealed beneath the sundial and the forged telegram intended to mislead both time and truth. His gaze fixed on Giles Lorraine. "You, Mr. Lorraine, were quick to suspect foul play, motivated by the rumors of inheritance and the colonel's increasingly erratic behavior. Yet your alibi was airtight." The nephew shifted uneasily. "I swear I knew nothing of any telegram's timing or any scheme." Whimsy nodded, turning then to Lady Margaret. "And you, Lady Margaret, whose gentle demeanor belies a steely resolve, you withheld knowledge of the sundial's secret, fearing the family's ruin if revealed." She met his gaze with quiet dignity. I wished only to protect my husband's memory and our name." "Understandable," Whimsy agreed. "But it was neither of you who altered time itself. The key lies with one whose role is to serve, yet whose ambition runs deeper than mere duty." He turned sharply to Mr. Ellis, the butler, who paled beneath his measured exterior. "Mr. Ellis, you had both the opportunity and the means to manipulate clocks, to falsify telegram times, and to obscure the true moment of the Colonel's death." Ellis's facade cracked. I did it to protect the family. The Colonel's debts were spiraling, and if the secret documents fell into the wrong hands, it would destroy everything." "Indeed," Whimsy said quietly. "But in your zeal to preserve the family's dignity, you overstepped, resorting to murder to silence the threat." The butler's shoulders slumped, resignation settling over him like a shroud. Whimsy continued, "The telegram's premature delivery was your fabrication. You timed the clocks to create confusion. The forced door scratch was staged to imply a break-in, and you ensured the sundial's secret remained buried, even if it meant burying the Colonel with it." Inspector Parker stepped forward, placing handcuffs on the subdued butler. "You are under arrest for the murder of Colonel Hargrave." As Ellis was led away, Whimsy turned to the assembled company, a wry smile returning. "The devil, as always, is in the details, and in the human heart's desperation to rewrite time and fate alike." Lady Margaret exhaled softly, the weight of grief and relief mingling in her eyes. Whimsy collected his coat and hat. "I shall leave you now to mend what has been broken. And remember, as the Roman poet Horace once advised, equam memento rebus in arduis servare mentem. Keep a calm mind in difficult times. A sentiment worth recalling, even in the darkest hours." With that, Lord Peter Wimsey vanished into the evening mist, leaving behind a household forever altered. The truth finally laid bare beneath the indifferent gaze of the stars.